Did you know that in films rated PG-13, the F word can only be said once? Just one more utterance of that fateful word and your film gets slapped with an R rating. While this and many other seemingly arbitrary rules plague the MPAA rating system, it's definitely less strict than what we used before. The Hays Code. If you turn on the Turner Classic Movies channel, you might hear the words pre-code or post-code when describing the time that a film came out. For example, Todd Browning's Freaks is a pre-code film. These phrases are in direct referral to the Hays Code, which was so ridiculous that it's used as a historical marker in film history. This code, which was implemented from 1934 through 1968, was so realistic they banned profanity, realistic violence, portrayals of sex, and basically anything that deviated from Christian values. Of course, many films found ways to work around this code, but for the most part, any films from this era are as inoffensive as you get. At least inoffensive to most people living in mid-century America. Yikes. However, one film in particular straddles the line between pre- and post-code cinema. Cecil B. DeMille's epic film Cleopatra was released in 1934, which was made during the pre-code period, but distributed right after the code had been implemented. The plot involves the often tragic and retold story of Cleopatra and her love affairs with Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. This film actually takes advantage of the last moments of pre-code flexibility. This film has sexual scenes, revealing outfits, and gray morality within the main characters. However, an often unacknowledged trait with these pre-code films is that female characters often displayed some sort of autonomy and power. Of course, with the story of Cleopatra, one would expect her to have some sort of power or autonomy because she is ruling a country. Cleopatra is about the queen's scandalous love affairs as much as it's about the trials and tribulations that come with ruling a country. Cleopatra both cares about the country of Egypt and the men that she loves. This is a relatively nuanced perspective, even considering today's female characters. She isn't looked down upon for enjoying sex and indulgence, but rather she's a relatable character that audiences of the time could relate to. This particular aspect of the film is especially interesting when you consider the standards of the Hays Code. You see, there were ways that films could push the envelope, just as long as they ended up condemning or giving that character their comeuppance in the end. In these instances of malicious compliance, these films would often include the same female characters that were powerful and embraced their sexuality, but they were often portrayed as villains, and they always got some sort of punishment in the end of the film. However, the filmmakers would still include little hints or winks or nudges towards the audience that kind of let them draw their own conclusions in the end. At first glance, Cleopatra seems like just another example of this trope. While she does have power and agency, and she rules a country and has all these affairs, she's still ultimately punished at the end, and she meets her demise. It does sort of feel like Cleopatra is punished or reprimanded for her behavior in the film. But I don't think this is what DeMille intended in this story. Cleopatra is still a protagonist that you want to root for, and when she ends up committing suicide at the end, it's more of a tragedy than a fitting punishment for a woman of her stature. It presents narratively as more of a Shakespearean historical tragedy than a salacious exploitation film. In fact, there is explicit proof that DeMille intended Cleopatra to be seen this way. In an article he wrote for the New Movie magazine, he explains how modern audiences, in the 1930s, shouldn't look down upon Cleopatra as a historical figure. The article is called "Cleopatra Was No Different," and it argues just that. Cleopatra shares many similarities to women in the 1930s. DeMille discusses how they both used perfumes, makeup, and fashion to master the art of love. However, he also points out that they used their beauty combined with their intelligence to become the ultimate partners. Success comes only when beauty and sex appeal are combined with brains. You may rest assured that Cleopatra had extraordinary brains. When she set out to charm a man, she used every ounce of brain power at her command. DeMille is not chastising Cleopatra for showcasing her sexuality, nor is he calling her frivolous or silly for showing so much love and devotion. Through this article, you can see how pre-code portrayals of women were surprisingly progressive, and why a conservative group would want to try and censor it. In the book Complicated Women, Sex and Power in Pre-Code Hollywood, the author states, "The best era for women's pictures was the pre-code era, the 5 years between the point that talkies became widely accepted in 1929 through July 1934, when the dread and draconian production code became the law of Hollywoodland. Before the code, women on screen took lovers, had babies out of wedlock, got rid of cheating husbands, enjoyed their sexuality, held down professions without apologizing for their self-sufficiency, and in general acted the way many of us think women acted only after 1968. Cleopatra is allowed to have lovers, sexual agency, power over an empire, and love for her family, all while being the main protagonist of the film. She stands in for the modern woman of the 1930s, according to the director himself. We still don't see that in a lot of films even today. It's not very often that an industry takes a huge step backwards, but the Hays Code shows how much reactionary attitudes can affect representation and general cultural norms. Filmmakers had to hide any notion of scandal behind a strict morality code with a sly wink that some audiences might not even notice. Cleopatra gives a glimpse into what could have been made in the decades to follow had the code not been implemented, and what would have happened if filmmakers didn't have to condemn their stars' sexualities.